China will never seek hegemony, no matter how developed it is, never expand, never seek spheres of influence, and never engage in an arms race.
Chinese President Xi Jinping talks geopolitics, cooperation and trade at the return of the Boao Forum for Asia conference. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu and this is The Heat. More than 2,000 government leaders, senior officials and business executives are on the tropical island of Hainan for the annual Boao Forum. It comes as China recently announced record growth of 18.3% for the first quarter as it rebounds from the coronavirus pandemic. In his video address, President Xi Jinping called for greater global economic cooperation while saying no nation should dictate global rules or interfere in other countries. CGTN's Yang Chengxi has more in this report.
President Xi said China will uphold the country's commitment to peaceful development and win-win cooperation based on its long-standing 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, which emphasizes mutual respect and non-interference among nations. He said China will promote a new type of international relations.
The COVID-19 pandemic has made it all the more clear to people around the world that we must reject the Cold War and zero-sum mentality and oppose a new Cold War and ideological confrontation in whatever form.
In the world of rising protectionism, Xi called for more open trade and investment, as well as regional economic integration. An example is the signing of the world's biggest trade deal, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership last year. The deal among Southeast Asian countries and other Pacific nations is expected to strengthen Asia's industry chain, supply chain, as well as data and talent sharing.
Attempts to erect walls or decouple run counter to the law of economics and market principles. They would hurt others' interests without benefiting oneself.
President Xi said once the pandemic is contained in Asia, China will host the second conference on dialogue of Asian civilizations, a regional cooperation mechanism launched in 2019. Over the past decade, China has proposed several mechanisms of international cooperation, like the Belt and Road Initiative.
I have said on various occasions that the Belt and Road Initiative is a public road open to all, not a private path owned by one single party. All interested countries are welcome to take part and share its benefits.
The World Bank says the Belt and Road Initiative is expected to help lift 7.6 million people out of extreme poverty and 32 million out of moderate poverty by 2030. Xi said China is also working with Belt and Road countries on combating COVID-19. China has launched vaccine co-production projects with countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Pakistan. E-commerce is another area that President Xi hopes to promote in the initiative. With better infrastructure and regulatory connectivity, digital trade could expect a boost. Domestically, he said China is promoting free trade by rolling out a foreign investment law, shrinking the foreign investment negative list, and further developing the free trade zone in Hainan province, where the Boao Forum is held. The Boao Forum for Asia is marking its 20th anniversary this year. It is one of the largest international conferences to take place during the pandemic. More than 4,000 people are taking part in this event, both online and on-site. Yang Chengxi, CGTN, Boao, Hainan Province.
There is much to talk about. Let's get straight to our panel. Ryan Patel is a global business executive and a senior fellow at Claremont Graduate University School of Management. Sourabh Gupta focuses on the Asia-Pacific region as a resident senior fellow with the Institute for China-America Studies. Author, columnist and educator Richard Heydarian is also with us. He teaches geopolitics at the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. And John Gong is here in Washington, D.C. He's an economics professor at the University of International Business and Economics in Beijing. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. And John Gong, let me start with you. Welcome to Washington. This is being called the Asian Davos. Of course, that's a reference to the World Economic Forum, which is held in the Swiss resort of Davos. There are 2,000 government and business leaders at this conference. So give us a sense of how significant this is and what this conference hopes to accomplish.
Yeah, as you said, the Boao Forum is billed as the Asian version of the Davos Forum. It's very significant in the region. And the fact that today, in the last 2 days, there are 2,000 people physically going there and attend this great gathering, testifies to the extent of China's great success of defeating the coronavirus. And I think the messages coming out of the forum, especially President Xi's speech, bodes very well for the next few years, I think, in terms of the economic development, in terms of the regional security and international relations in the area. So I think overall, I think the message is quite upbeat, and I think in some sense, President Xi is also speaking to Washington in a sense. I think the message is very clear, as your program has highlighted. China has no intention of seeking hegemony, seeking expansion, and seeking sphere of influence. I think this is a resounding message that China is not interested in a sort of competition, sort of a geopolitical competition, as Washington would have people to believe.
So, John, at its core, is this a networking experience, or would there be more substantive issues discussed, like policy direction and things like that?
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, you look at the 2,000 people going there. A lot of them actually are business executives. They certainly go there, for this sort of a political, economic gathering. They also, I'm pretty sure, a lot of them are also talking to people for businesses, especially on the island of Hainan. I mean, there are a lot of things going on this island. The economic activity is booming, so I'm pretty sure there will be people who are actually looking for concrete projects and other opportunities, taking advantage of this venue.
Right. Ryan Patel, as we just had John Gong tell us there are many business executives at this conference. Among them are Apple's Tim Cook. Elon Musk from Tesla is also there. As a global business executive, why would you want to be there?
Well, fortunate enough, I actually got to be a part of the Davos Agenda 2021. I spoke on sustainable value chains in January. And why you would want to be a part of this, or these forums are so important, is not just about being seen. It's about actually collaborating with your fellow business executives, other governments, to actually solve problems. Now, what the forum has an opportunity, and that's all forums, is you come back every year, you have to be seen. What are you doing to make an impact? So I talked about values change or supply or sustainability. Year over year, you have to show progression. And to do that, it takes more collaboration. I think these are opportunities not just to say the words, to say statements, but to build those relationships either with governments or with your fellow peers, to be able to make change and have harder conversations. And that's what we're hoping for in the future, that many of these forums will allow people to see externally, like as individuals, and internally in the conference. And what has been your experience, Ryan? Have you seen this kind of collaboration work? I think it's actually, I'm going to say the pandemic has also accelerated these kind of forum conversations, because now, at least the conversations I've been a part of, it's more about, what can we do and what can we do with speed, right? And change. And I think there's more pressures on doing that. And I think I've seen more rhetoric among business officials and just businesses in general about how do you keep up with the demand and the trends. And I think that's more of a worrisome than just throwing out statements and saying, oh, we're about change. It's about what are you doing? So I do see movement because it's being forced among a lot of different parties. Sourabh Gupta, as we heard just a moment ago, President Xi Jinping assured the world that China would not seek to impose its will on others. He had other things to say as well. Let's listen to it.
The future of the world should be mastered by all countries in the world. Rules made by a single country, or just a few countries, cannot be forcibly applied on others. The world order cannot be led by unilateralism from some country. Equal treatment, mutual trust and respect should be placed as priorities in relationships between countries. Arrogant treatment of other countries and interference in other countries' domestic affairs will not win the hearts of the people.
So, Sourabh, how are those kind of sentiments likely to play with China's neighbors? And looking at it another way, is this a veiled criticism of U.S. policies?
Yes, it is a veiled criticism of U.S. policy. China's point has been that we need to recommit to the UN-centered system. It's not about a single country or a small group of countries then trying to shape and dictate the agenda. It is about all countries meeting at the UN and trying to hash out their differences and have a consensus-based agreement on the way forward, because that is the most durable way in which we are going to get progress and change. With regard to the neighboring countries, I suppose, will have a slightly different point of view, simply because in their view, it's China which has kind of created anxieties and suspicions of where it is going. And part of this has to do with the fact that while the Chinese government has been fairly assertive in asserting its territorial claims or asserting its territoriality-linked claims, it has perhaps not been providing as much reassurance that it could. And it's in that context, I think they are a little worried that as China just gets more and more powerful, where exactly is China going to go? And what might be the situation, the case in such situations. So yes, there is a different sort of view, and it would be helpful if China were be able to resolve a few territoriality-linked conflicts in its periphery, and there are quite a few, particularly in its maritime areas.
Richard, it has been a long time. Great to have you back on the show. Let's talk about the Philippines. The World Bank has called the Philippines one of the most dynamic economies in the East Asia Pacific region, but its economy did contract in the fourth quarter of last year. The country is part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. President Xi talked about that. Let's listen to what he had to say.
女士们、先生们、朋友们。
Ladies, gentlemen, and friends, I have always said that the Belt and Road Initiative is a wide, sunshine avenue for everyone to walk on, hand in hand. It is not a private, narrow alley of specific people. Interested countries can participate to jointly work together, cooperate, and benefit. The Belt and Road Initiative is a pursuit of development, an upholding of mutual benefit, and a passing of hope.
Sir Richard, how important is the Belt and Road Initiative to the Philippines economy and, of course, to its post-pandemic recovery?
Yeah, I think the Boao Forum has been important on at least 3 levels, including for countries like the Philippines that, you know, they may be ally of the United States, but they want to also cultivate very fruitful and strong relationship with China, especially now that their economy has been battered. According to the International Monetary Fund, the Philippines and India will suffer the greatest growth decline compared to their pre-pandemic growth potential over the next 5 years, and the Philippine GDP actually shrank by almost 10% last year, among the worst in the world. So the Philippines right now is looking towards getting the maximum amount of investment and assistance from around the world, including China. And that is not only in terms of vaccines and public health assistance, but also in terms of tangible infrastructure investments, especially as President Duterte ends his term and wants to leave some sort of legacy and shape the future of Philippine-China relations. I think, first of all, the Boao Forum was very important because it gave us a preview of what the world could look like with the semblance of normality, with so many important people in person meeting each other, and also how China can be not only an oasis of stability as it has been over the past year compared to its rivals across the world, but how China could be a pivot of economic recovery. I think the second importance of this Boao Forum in countries like the Philippines, and President Duterte have been watching these things very carefully, is that it is also preventative. I think President Xi Jinping wanted to make sure that we don't slide into kind of a Cold War. Over the past few months alone, the Biden administration has been consolidating the quadrilateral security dialogue, has been trying to network with its allies across the world, has been trying to launch a new initiative with Japan to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative and an edge in high technology. So I think China wants to send a message here that it doesn't want to go towards the path of confrontation with U.S., especially after what happened in the Alaska summit, when there were clearly deadlocks that could not be resolved in the short run. And I think lastly, and this is where Philippines and a lot of ASEAN countries are watching the Boao Forum and the rhetoric out of China, is the issue of partnership. So this is not just a preview of future and China's role and also preventative attempt by China to prevent a Cold War, but this is also about global partnership we know that there's no way that we can resuscitate global economy. There's no way that we can deal with new mutations and new waves in the global pandemic unless the big powers come together. And this is where US and China come together, not only in terms of government, but also in terms of private sector and public sector cooperation. And the fact that you have big titans of US business sector there in China in the Boao Forum, that tells you a lot about how China wants to cultivate these long-term relations well beyond the diplomatic frictions it's now experiencing with the Biden administration.
John Gong, the forum released a report showing that Asian economies experienced a sharp drop in growth rates last year, and that, of course, was due to the pandemic. Now, with China showing growth, it showed growth in the first quarter of just over 18%. With that kind of growth in the first quarter, could we see China lead a regional recovery?
Well, the 18.3% in the first quarter is very special in the sense that, compared to the same period last year, which is it's a negative 6.8 drop. So, that's a very significant drop. So on top of that, you see 18.3%. I think the China's Statistics Bureau has said that, if you look over the 2-year periods, that's actually a 5% increase, respectively, for the first quarter last year and first quarter this year. This is actually quite moderate growth. So I think, the government used to be talking about 6% growth or above 6% growth. So in a sense, we're talking about a minus 1%. I would say, put it this way, it's a minus 1% reduction in GDP because of this pandemic. And I think that's something bearable. I think that's something not bad, actually. Now, in terms of whether China is able to pull the world out of this pandemic-induced recession, I think there's a fair good of chance, especially, if we're talking about the Southeast Asian countries, because after all, the Southeast Asian bloc is China's largest trading partner, already surpassing the European Union and North America. So, and China's, the weight of China's economy, its percentage of total, global growth is very large. Something like 30% of the growth is attributed to China's economic activities. So, if China's doing well, I think, in general, it should bode very well for the rest of Southeast Asia and East Asia. So, so I'm actually quite optimistic. And I also want to add another comment about the first quarter growth rate. I think it's the significance of that 18.3% is more than just a double-digit number. It's quite significant double-digit number. If you look at the subsectors that are contributing to this growth, a lot of them are associated with these new sectors, the sunrise sectors in alternative energy, for example, in biotech, in digital economy. These booming new sectors of the future. And I think that says that, structurally, China's economy is moving in the right direction. So I think in that sense, I'm quite hopeful that, the economy here in China should perform fairly well for the rest of the year, especially in consideration of the various vaccines being rolled out. A new vaccine is actually going to be pushed out in China very soon to the mass market. It's something very similar to the Johnson & Johnson one-shot vaccine. So I'm quite hopeful that things will turn much better from now on.
Ryan, two of the major themes we heard at the conference, at the forum, are global economic integration and strengthening global governance. Here's President Xi again. Let's listen.
Global governance should be fit for a political and economic order which has changed, follow the trend of peaceful development and win-win cooperation, and fulfill the realistic needs of dealing with global challenges. We should uphold the principles of consultation, cooperation, and mutual benefits, abide by true multilateralism, and make the global governance system go forward fairly and reasonably.
So, Ryan, from a business perspective, how has the political and economic order changed, and what impact is that having on growth?
Anand, you know me too well. You knew I was going to talk about global governance, and you beat me to the punch. I think that word, global and then governance, is something that is new. It's completely new because you look at what businesses need to do. There needs to be good governance within building their businesses. And now when businesses are intertwined into political issues and trade, where does governance, the word, come in? Where does that play for businesses? And I think that then has to play into what global governance means. I think the definition is still being defined on who and what are those best practices equal to. And the reason why global governance is an important aspect in the business world, it cuts out the uncertainty when there are situations of tragedies or just things that are unknown to help a business be stable, right? When you have good governance, you have great advice, you have ability to still maintain. And I think that is kind of, that word is a cohesive word, meaning everybody has to come together. That includes government, businesses, to work together to provide maybe a framework, which is very difficult to do truthfully, but that doesn't mean people can't try to have a cohesive governance aspect or framework.
Sourabh, there have been developments in other ways of cooperation between the United States and China. The U.S. climate change special envoy, John Kerry, he's been in China. He held a meeting with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, in Shanghai, 2 days of talks there. And of course, there is a very big and important economic component to climate change. What do you make of, we listen to a lot of about competition between China and the United States, but this is an area of cooperation. What do you make of that?
Oh, I thought it was a refreshing breath of fresh air, frankly. It shows that the two countries on very important issues can set aside their differences and cooperate. And I think there's credit which goes to both sides. In President Biden's recently released interim national strategic guidance, its national security strategy, its interim national security strategy, the foremost threat, it says, are those which need collective action. It's not about a rival nation state or not. It's about those threats which relate to all of us and which need collective action. And what John Kerry did in Beijing today is talk about in tackling those threats. I think also the credit is due at the Chinese end, because the Biden administration has still continued with some very, very harsh decisions against China. And President Xi didn't have, a joint statement didn't have to be signed. China didn't need to be very facilitative and outgoing in the context of the Earth Day summit that President Biden had called. China could have put up big targets, big numbers at COP26 at the end of the year, not in the context of a conversation with the Americans, but they've done that. And that's a great thing, because what President Xi's showing is that we will play to our interests, we will not play to our grievances. And if the two sides can do that, I think there's immense scope for cooperation.
Richard, we heard at the beginning of the show from our reporter talking about the Regional Economic Partnership Agreement, that's the RCEP, which was signed in November of 2020. How much momentum has that been injecting into the region's economies?
Well, as far as RCEP is concerned, this is not just initiative of one power or the other. Japan and ASEAN have been behind this initiative for quite some time, but naturally China will be the dominant force within the RCEP, precisely because it's the biggest trading partner of more than 120 nations, including much of the ASEAN, if not the entirety of the region. So I think it's incorrect to say that RCEP is kind of a China-led initiative per se. Nonetheless, the RCEP is extremely important to restoring faith in globalization, because the reality is that since the deadlock in the Doha rounds, and with countries like the United States turning towards greater protectionism, even Biden is, struggling with protectionist impulses within his own party, never mind what Trump did over the past few years. You have countries like India, which are also extremely protectionist, and actually India was a big roadblock as far as the RCEP negotiations was concerned. So here we see RCEP is not only a way to reboot globalization, but reboot a more China-driven globalization, and that's why it's extremely important. And that has put a lot of pressure on Japan and the United States to come up with some sort of alternative. Now, as far as the Southeast Asian region is concerned, it wants to go just beyond growing trade, because trade is good, but if you have a lot of trade deficit, or the quality of trade is not that good, that will have negative impact in terms of your long-term sustainability, in terms of your development. So I think a lot of Southeast Asian countries are also looking towards the next phase of trade, which is in the digital sector, in the high-tech sector, and also towards greater investments, high-quality investments from China, so that they can move up the value chain. So I think that's where the symbolic, psychological, and long-term importance of the RCEP comes in picture. And lastly, as far as the Boao Forum is concerned, I think a lot of people are also looking at whether we're moving towards a BRI 2.0, which has greater emphasis not only on sustainability and good governance, but has greater participation from big business, including from the United States, in ways that would really help countries in the region to revive after the pandemic ravage.
Richard, very quickly, I'm running out of time, but this is an important question. It's more of a political question, but you know, the Philippines also has a close relationship with the United States. It's historically had a close relationship with the United States, and I'm wondering, is there a risk here of Asian countries being forced to choose sides in this competition that we're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, as far as Southeast Asian countries are concerned, their very raison d'etre is to avoid the Cold War dilemmas that they faced in the past, how Southeast Asia was divided along the Asian version of the the Cold War divides. Now, the problem here is that in countries like the Philippines, the divides are almost internal. It's not like some countries in Southeast Asia side with China versus US. You have some elements within the Philippine political elite which are siding more towards China and some siding more towards the United States. So this is also about not only fault lines among countries, but growing ideological and political fault lines within these countries. And I expect very much that China and US and the so-called New Cold War will be quite a central issue in the upcoming presidential elections next year in the Philippines.
John, very quickly, I've got a minute left. What kind of message do you think this forum, it's a well-attended forum, but what kind of message do you think it will send to the United States at this time?
Yeah, well, I would speak, trying to interpret President Xi's speech in that regard. I think it's a very, very reconciliatory tone. Keep in mind that even though President Xi sort of criticized the current global governance system, and he talked about his own vision of global governance system, but I think his message is by no means to imply that China is interested in topple the whole in global governance system. What he's talking about is some improvements, some marginal improvements to reflect the concerns and issues associated with developing countries. Yeah. And he said the key word is consultation here, right? I mean, count how many times he mentioned this word consultation. So I think, overall, China is in no interest of initiating this competition with the United States. It wants to work with the United States, in terms of a global governance system. So I think, overall, this is actually a quite a dove type of a message, and that I think Washington needs to be, very mindful of that message and listen very carefully.
Sourabh, very quickly, there has been something of a counter by President Biden. He said that the US and Japan would jointly invest in things like 5G technology, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, as well as chip supply chains. What was the message Biden was sending here?
Biden was sending the message that we are in the game and we are competing with China and competing not on zero-sum terms, but on positive-sum terms. It remains to be seen, though. The US and Japan have been talking this game for a couple of years now. Whether they can actually translate that into action remains to be seen.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.